This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
It is 10:08 at WPSL 1590, the talk of the Treasure Coast. You're on Ask a Rabbi.
And this is Rabbi Shafir Loeb of Congregation Eitz Chayim, your Jewish home on the Treasure Coast. And it is a beautiful Friday out there.
Not for a couple of your listeners in Tucson, as the University of Arizona women
Oh,
didn't make it.
okay.
I just,
Yeah.
throwing it out there.
Okay. So, hi, Cher. Yes. Well, and she was holding her her breathing and
Oh yeah, boy, she loves the Wildcats.
yes, she does.
Yep.
She definitely loves women's basketball.
Yep.
So, shout out to Sharon. She's probably in class with her so many little ones that she teaches the early grades.
There you go.
Yeah. So, got that. And as far as, so Kaiser, we just finished up a term and we start Winter D on Tuesday. We have Monday off.
Winter D.
Winter D.
Oh.
Yeah, they have 3 terms a year, winter, summer, and fall. That works out that way you don't have the same initial for any of the terms. I know that it sounds funny in the end of March, almost April, to be saying winter, but it's the winter term.
It does make sense, though. I mean,
It started in January, so.
yeah, sure.
So it's the and the way that Kaiser works is it runs 1 month per term, 4 terms in a semester. So the average student will take 4 courses. Some students will take an overload. They'll double up one of those months and take an extra class. And you got to have the grade average to be able to do that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's a not everybody gets to do it.
Okay, so there is a grade minimum.
Yeah, to be able to take the extra course.
I got you.
But,
Okay.
the other key for that, for Kaiser students, and it is an attraction for those who choose Kaiser, is that if you go 3 full terms a year, you finish a little sooner. Right? So
Okay.
that's important.
Interesting. Okay. So instead of, say, a 4-year college career,
Yeah, you finish it in 3.
3 plus, or
Now,
there could be 3.
yeah, easily 3, because you're getting a whole, right, the average college program, students don't go over summer, and there's a bigger gap between semesters so that they get more time off in the year. But with Kaiser, so it's 8 semesters, if you will, to finish a 4-year degree. And at Kaiser, you get 3 a year, so 3, 3, and 2. You can finish in 3 in a little bit.
3 and change.
Yeah,
Yeah,
3 and
yeah,
change.
yeah. Nice.
And if you can double up, you can accelerate even that some.
Yeah, Carol made it through IU, through Indiana in 3 years. Yeah.
Most in the old days, when you and I played with the dinosaurs, then if you wanted to get ahead, you basically took some courses in summer, and that was how you
Yes.
jumped it.
Yeah.
But yeah, for Kaiser students, they go, if they decide not to take any time off, they can do it very intensely and acceleratedly. So it's a good deal.
And again, that's kind of individual instruction almost. I mean, it's small classes.
For most of them, in the nursing classes, some of the classes get a little bit big, and in some of the sciences, the classes are. But big by Kaiser standards is not big by IRSC standards. It's actually one of the things. So I was with my IRSC students, and there's a philosophy problem called the trolley problem, the trolley car problem. And I'll explain it in a minute. But we had talked about it, and then they raised a question about it, and so we were going to talk about it again. And there's an excellent version of it that a Harvard professor teaches. And so I showed them, there's a video of this professor teaching this class to what I'm assuming are probably Harvard freshmen or sophomores. And it's huge. I mean, there are hundreds of students in that class. It's in an auditorium with 2 balconies.
Wow. Yeah.
And the assistants run around with microphones so that when a student either answers a question or asks one, the TA hands them a mic, and they have to talk to him with the microphone.
Okay, so down on the stage, is there a real professor or is it a TA?
That was a real professor.
That was a real prof, huh?
And
wow.
whether or not he only comes in and teaches some of the classes, I don't know. That's highly likely, because you're right. At the Ivy League schools, very often it's a TA. It's a teaching assistant who's actually teaching the classes.
Yeah.
And that's different also.
I'd say like that at UCLA.
Well, and the larger universities, it is that way. And they don't need as many teaching professors because they've got the students to do the teaching. Oh, God. Which sounds kind of funny. I was a TA once upon a time, too. And, yeah, it makes it a lot easier on the professor.
Were the dinosaurs created by then? Oh, I'm sorry.
I love you, too. But that is, so it was one of the things that I pointed out to the students at IRSC. You know, we talked about what is the value of where you go to school. And the big piece is it's got to be a system that works for you. There's a certain kind of student for whom the Kaiser approach is the perfect way. There's another kind of student for which IRSC is perfect. And then there's a group of students for whom Harvard is the right answer. Harvard's $60,000 a semester.
God. Okay.
You know, but depending on what you're going to do. Yeah, those are all
Is that sheepskin worth that much?
Well, that's, of course, the question. Yeah, and again, there's a difference. It's still a sheepskin if it comes from IRSC or if it comes from Harvard. It's still a sheepskin. And is the difference worth it? That's the other question. How, you know, and those are questions that we're not going to know the answer to for quite a long time. It's a guess when you're a student. But yeah, my students at IRSC were all just astounded what it would be like to be. They don't bother to give out name tags because they don't have any intention of getting to know you. You're just there to interact with them and do what you do. I'm not sure that I'd thrive in quite that environment. I took a few classes in auditorium type classrooms, and they're not fun.
No, it actually, when I was at Loyola, and we've talked about this before, I averaged maybe 14, 15, classmates in a class. And he said, come on over to my freshman English at UCLA.
Yeah.
And I said, where do we go? And he said, Pauley Pavilion. I said, what? Mm-hmm. There were 3,000 people in this basketball arena. And again, it was not a professor. It was a TA teaching the course.
Yeah.
And they're looking at the big screens, and oh my goodness.
And that's back then when it wasn't so easy to look at the big screen.
Yeah, right. Well,
no offense, sir, but that was a year or two ago.
Yeah, yes. Like 40. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
See, I could not thrive. It was bad enough for me when there was only 15 students because I was a terrible student. But I just couldn't. I'd get lost.
Yeah.
I would just get
and so that's the piece, right? If you really benefit from that one-on-one or one-on-5 or 10, then Kaiser's the place to go. If you can work with a class that's 40 to 50 students, then IRSC is the place to go. And if you're able to deal with being 1 out of 3,000 and excel in that, then go for that. But I think that that's I don't know, to me, that's not as individual in many, many ways. So for example, the class that I'm talking about that we looked at this video, which was a great video, and the prof is excellent. It's a subject that I've taught, and so it's one that I know. So I wasn't learning things, but I was enjoying the way he did it. And the thing is that I changed what my plan was for the class because that's what the class wanted, and it fit within the rubric of what we needed to cover. And if you don't work with a small class, you can't have that kind of flexibility. Right.
I'll bet.
Right.
Sure.
These are profs whose lectures are almost canned because they give them over and over and over again. And mine are never that static. I cover the same subject and I cover the material, but I'm going to do it slightly differently just because.
That's you.
Well, first of all, it's me, and the world changes from semester to semester.
Yes, it does.
And there's new information to bring in. So, for example, we looked at a video. This one is almost kind of humorous in many ways. We looked at a 7-year-old video on the Spanish flu.
Oh, God.
And so it's talking about pandemics. It's talking about the H1N1, which comes out of the Spanish flu, which we still struggle and work against. And when the Spanish flu first hit, they didn't understand how viruses worked. This is relatively new science, but it was really interesting to see how they were talking about the danger of a new pandemic coming through.
Wow.
And it hadn't yet when the video was made. So I hadn't planned on using a video that was going to talk about that. Again, it was a subject that came up
That's very cool.
in the class. But we were talking about how societies respond to pandemics and how that fits in with a variety of subjects that we were dealing with. And so I said, well, let's just take a look and get some of the, because nobody in the class really knew about this. They knew the Spanish flu had happened. They knew that it lasted a while, but it was 2 big years of over 50 million people died on the planet from that plague, from that pandemic. It was a virus, and viruses have been around, and the video showed a really good explanation of how the proteins on a virus change and why that's an issue and why it's not. They talked about there's 4 different groups of viruses. And the A viruses, which is what the Spanish flu and what COVID both were, those are multi-species viruses. Some viruses will only attack humans. Those are not usually very deadly. There are some viruses that will attack a couple of species, very often mammals, of which humans are just one example. And others, like the swine flu and the avian flu, will go all over the place. And that's part of their infection capability. If they can cross the barrier between species, they are much more infectious as a rule.
I remember a show that Dr. Scheib was doing, and of course he was Chinese medicine, and talking about thousands of years ago and how they dealt with viruses. And I'm thinking, really? Okay, sure. Yeah,
Well,
they were around.
They were around, and the Bible has them. And the biggest thing that you did was you isolated people who were sick or who had contact with people who were sick.
Gee, what a surprise.
Yeah, and those who survived were welcomed after a long period of time back in. After
Wow.
they were
Yeah.
no longer sick, right? That was the natural way. And you didn't intubate people, and you weren't able to save people the way that we were. As bad and as horrible as COVID was, it didn't do to society what the Spanish flu did. And we don't remember that, although there was a great video from a 108-year-old woman talking who had survived both the Spanish flu and COVID.
Oh my goodness. Oh,
You can find that. It's a 108-year-old
she's
woman.
108?
Yeah, when she made the video.
Wow.
Yeah. So living through two major pandemics. And what we call the seasonal flu is the descendant from that Spanish flu. It was called Spanish because in the aftermath of World War II, because it came out in 1918, in the aftermath of World War II, Europe was not talking about the people who got sick because they were afraid of appearing weak to their enemies. Yeah. But Spain hadn't been involved in that war. And so when people got sick there, they didn't curb the media or put any censorship on them. And so people heard about it. And so the idea came out that, oh, this started in Spain.
The Spanish flu. Yeah. Wow.
And it's a good thing that they didn't name COVID. Yeah, I know some groups in our society tried to name it to a location, but viruses should not be named to an area. They should have just a designation. That's a really good way, because later on, the stigma and the aftermath of having something named that's horrible for you, it's just not right. It's not just, because we are influenced by that. The influenza, never mind. I'm not going to go into there. So that was kind of interesting. And so because of the way that I teach, I'm able to learn like this. I think this is an interesting thing to have learned about. And it was a very interesting perspective to see before people projected the virus. And the other thing that was also interesting out of that particular video were the images of the virus, which the H1N1 is also a corona-style virus. The coronavirus has to do with how the little proteins are shaped on the outside. The other piece that I learned that was really interesting, there are 4 major types of flu virus that circulate within any group. And within those types, whichever one your body learns to fight, that's the one against which it is most effective.
Huh.
And
Okay.
it tries to fight. So if you have an A type and you get a B type, then your body's at a little bit of a loss. And that's part of what the vaccine tries to do, is it tries to teach your body to go for all the types.
Wow. That's wild. That is wild. So how did the students react to this video?
It was interesting to watch their faces and their comments, because we tend to think that we have the worst. And of course,
yeah.
we don't.
That's media.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also human nature to think that what I experience is the whole universe.
Right.
And sorry, folks, each of us has our own universe and they're all different. So, yeah. So for our Christian friends, I'm going to say Happy Easter. To our Wiccan friends, Happy Ostara. Those are the holidays coming up. Jews, we're happily after Purim and starting to look at the cupboards and get ready for Passover, which won't be until the end of April. And we are going to be having at Congregation Eitz Chayim, we'll be moving into the fellowship hall at St. Andrew's Lutheran. And there we will have a full ritual Seder. And that's going to have great choices. It's not a long Seder, it's a modern Seder, but it's full ritual. And $36, I'll go ahead and say the price. And you can reserve either on the website or by calling the temple and making a reservation.
Nice.
So it is open to anyone who wants to partake. And the choices are brisket, salmon, or chicken.
Yeah, the brisket has sold me here.
Yeah, I understand. And you get to have all 3. It's not just, you don't have to pick one.
Yeah.
It's family style / buffet. You'll be able to pick the entrees that you want. So nobody should go home hungry. Most people don't.
We had a friend who was a PR director of a hospital in Los Angeles, and she invited us to their Seder, and oh my goodness, I have never in my life
Seen so much.
seen so much food.
Yeah.
Oh
Seders,
my goodness.
Seders make Thanksgiving feasts
Oh.
look like an appetizer.
Pauper.
Yeah.
It really is.
And it starts the way that we tend to do a more, what I will call Ashkefardic, and you've heard me say that phrase before. So Ashkenaz are the Jews that come from Europe. Sephardi are the ones that come from Spain originally and through Turkey and that part. And then there's Mizrahi Jews, which come from the Far East area. And all of these groups have evolved the Seder slightly into slightly different habits and traditions and recipes, of course, because we're in different locations. And we try to blend all of that in our Seder.
That's nice.
So, for example, we do the
Now, would the Orthodox
Afghani.
do that too?
Some do, some don't. It's everybody's Seder is something different, and Passover is one of those times where families tend to stick to themselves because traditions depends on how open you are. But because I cannot stop being a teacher, I teach about Afghani customs, I teach about Sephardi customs, and I make some dishes that are Sephardi for it.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So we have a good time.
Wow, that sounds great.
And you're welcome to join that if you choose to. It's April 22nd. That's a Monday night. We'll be at St. Andrews.
So all of our callers, sign up.
There you go.
Yeah.
So one other thing that I think our callers should know about is, and we've talked about that too, I am in the process, I'm an intern as a mental health counselor. And right now I am offering counseling services at Change of Mind, rather, on Bethany, or just off of Bethany. It's behind the Publix on at the corner of Bethany and St. Lucie
Behind
West.
the old Publix, yeah.
And if you don't want to be with an intern, you're certainly welcome to give them a call, and one of the other fully licensed counselors will be there. I operate under the supervision of Eric Lever, who's the owner of Change of Mind. But you can just call or go on that website, and Mary Ellen will be glad to help match you up with the counselor of your choice. I can do Cigna and Aetna or private pay. If you need one of the other insurances, then you'll need to talk to Mary Ellen about one of the other counselors.
There you go. Okay.
But that's Change of Life. And it's an excellent, and I apologize, Eric, I should have the phone number on the top of my head, and I don't. I will have that next
Yep.
week.
Very cool. That's nice.
Yeah.
Well, you're in a good radio station for mental.
And no, I don't just psychoanalyze people all the time. And that's not what my job is, and I don't have the energy for it. So if I see you and it's not in a session, I don't have all of the gears cranking that way. It takes an amount of attention that's somewhat over the top and intense. Although I have to say, I ended up this last term doing an odd thing. Not only did I had a double load of classes this last term. We normally, teachers also teach typically one class per month, and every so often you're expected to take an extra one, so that profs typically teach 5 in 4 months. And I've been doing doubles for a while, and I was on a double this last term, just finishing up. And we had an emergency in one of our classes, and I was asked to finish up 2 other classes that somebody was teaching. So not only did I teach mine, but I also had to finish this last week with another 2 classes. And my supervisors said to me, "And what part of you thinks that was okay?"
Oh, my.
How
Yeah.
much of you do you think you have, and where are your boundaries?
Okay, as a counselor, how many like sessions does it take for you to really get to know somebody?
It takes at least 3 or 4 to really get in
Okay.
and to establish what's called a therapeutic relationship. Because, among other things, the client has to realize that you are focused on them and that you're paying attention, that they're not just one of 4,000 in a cathedral or in a
I
stadium,
gotcha. I gotcha. Yeah.
that they are the subject of it. And clients can be an individual, it can be a family, it can be a couple. It's a variety of different ways. Couples have their own interesting pieces, but the client then is the couple. It's not one side or the other, and a counselor doesn't take sides. The counselor's not there to solve your problem. The counselor is there to help you solve the problem.
Wait a minute, back up.
The counselor is there to help you solve the problem.
Hmm.
It's not like take this pill and call me in the morning.
Right, right.
There's always homework, there's always work, because the reality is that people usually know what they need to do. They either have closed that information to themselves and don't see it, the same way as my supervisor said to me, what were you thinking when you said yes to that? What was your motivation? And sometimes you may not like the answer to that question, but it's a question you have to ask yourself. And you have to develop that relationship with your counselor, your therapist, your clinician, to have them be able to ask that kind of question without you going, ah, right? Because when you go into that defense mode, you're not going to change something.
So, how do you handle somebody who really does not want to be there?
That's always, somebody who's like court mandated or parent
Well,
mandated.
okay, there you go. Yeah, I didn't even think about
Those are the ones that, right? Everybody who walks in the door wants to be there unless the system or their parents mandate. Now, very often they come to it because friends are saying you need some help
Okay.
managing that. And a part of what the counselor does is listens to your issues and then helps you sort and sequence them so that they aren't unmanageable, so they're not overwhelming, so that you are taking the bits and pieces. And it's like if I want to clear off a cluttered dining room table, one of the things that I do is help people work through clutter, is you don't do it by knocking everything off the table and having this giant pile on the floor. You do it by working through. You work a foot at a time. And if you do that, then within some amount of time, the table's clear. And that's how our problems are. Our problems are cluttered tables. We complicate them by the rules that we set for ourselves, by the the stories we tell ourselves about the story, if that makes any sense.
So you're helping people kind of, what is it, compartmentalize
Well, just,
their lives?
yeah,
if you will?
prioritize, compartmentalize,
Yeah.
and sometimes I help people practice what they want to say to somebody so that they can think through it before they get into the fight and hopefully start to see things from more than just their perspective. Right. So one of the things that I often ask people is, what do you think is the problem, and what does the other person think the problem is? And that's an interesting exercise.
Oh, yeah, that would be.
Another popular question that I'll ask is, what would it be like if you didn't have this particular problem? How would you function? And sometimes asking that question allows the person, to realize that, yeah, they can function without this problem, and that sometimes it's the expectation of a problem that creates the problem. So it's not only do I work with somebody to solve the issue that's there in the room, but also to build the life skills so that next week, when a similar problem comes up, they already have tools in place to know how to work with it.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not about manipulating other people. It's about how do I manipulate myself, right? How do I manage myself so that these issues don't become problems? So that, because challenges are going to happen in life. You're going to have times when there's too much to do. You're going to have times when somebody has a different agenda than you do. How do you address that other than picking up your marbles and going home? Because that's seldom going to it might solve the problem short term for you, but you're going to end up with a lot of marbles and no friends. And we are not designed to function that way. And so it's how do I solve the issues? How do I stand up for myself in a way that doesn't escalate and alienate? And yeah, that's part of the work. There's a lot of different ways to do it. How do I work through an addiction so that it doesn't control me?
Mm-hmm.
Those are all different kinds of questions that you might ask. How do I get over the grief of XYZ? How do I deal with losing my job and not give up on life? Because the reality is we all face these kinds of catastrophes and traumas. In fact, I actually did a paper on trauma yesterday. And,
And it happens.
Yeah, life happens. And, the key is how do we do it and how do we know when to get help to do it and all of those things, because we all have some kind of support network or not, and some of it's learning how to deal with that. And I see that we have a call. That probably means I need to take my aid and put it on here so I can hear Jerry on line 1. Thank you for calling, Jerry.
The city of Jerusalem, there's that brass dome church or cathedral. And I understand there's 3 of those representing all the different faiths. And I understand that the Christian monks do the Stations of the Cross every morning. I just wondered about that. Is there every morning? And
Yeah.
they've been able to live in unison all these years, and I just wondered, is there actually 3 domed churches that look like the one they always show you? And I just wondered about that. Well, I'd like to listen off air.
Okay, sure. Jerry's asking about domed churches in Jerusalem and do they do the Stations of the Cross? And the answer is yes, they do the Stations of the Cross. There are Armenians. There's actually 4 quarters to Jerusalem right now. There's the Armenian quarter, the Christian quarter, the Muslim quarter, and the Jewish quarter. So this, and it's not exactly quarters, but it's areas, sections.
So would the Armenians be more of all the Orthodoxes together, maybe?
They're not going to have all the Orthodoxes in there. There are many, many, many churches, mosques, and synagogues within Jerusalem and surrounding the Old City. Jerry's talking about the Old City, which is the area inside the walls of Jerusalem. So if you look at a map, you'll see a little tiny piece called the Old City, and it is broken down roughly into quarters. And so the Western Wall is going to be at the edge of the Jewish quarter. If you go up onto the Temple Mount, you're going to see that's the Dome of the Rock is up there. It's not a mosque, it is a covering over the rock that's in the center of that mound. And that rock is Abrahamically very significant. For Muslims, it's the rock from which Muhammad ascends to heaven in his dream. It's a dream. Muhammad never physically was in Jerusalem, and according to Muslim tradition, that's the location in Muhammad's dream, is that in his dream he comes to that rock and ascends to heaven. It's a vision. Jewishly, traditionally, it is the rock on which Abraham was almost going to sacrifice Isaac. And so it has a lot of religious significance. But over time, when the Muslims controlled Jerusalem, they built a dome to protect it and to protect the pilgrims who came to see the rock. It's a giant rock, and it's well protected from people so that people don't try to take home a piece of that and take it down to nothing like people have with Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock is barely a boulder anymore because people have taken home bits and pieces of
Moon rocks.
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah, something like that. So that's the dome. But there's also the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and there's a couple of other mosques that are in the area. And there are little tiny synagogues there. And in the Christian section, you can go from church to church to church. And there is on the Via Dolorosa the Stations of the Cross for Christians to do. It's candidly big tourist money for Jerusalem. So yeah, it's going to happen every day. Follow the money, folks. But you also can, there's a million different tours in Jerusalem, and I highly recommend many of them. Some of them are walking the walls, so you can actually see what it was like to defend the city way back when.
Okay.
It is a walled city. Some of the cities are walled in biblical days and even before
And
biblical
you can walk
days.
on top of the wall?
You can. Oh, they're big. It's kind of like the Great Wall of China. There's
Oh.
great big walking areas because you would have people would have wheeled cannons and all kinds of things.
So, dumb question. Who built those?
Lots of people. The last one in Jerusalem was probably built by Herod. That's why he's called Herod the Builder. He built Megiddo, which was also a walled city. It's no longer standing. You can visit the ruins. He built Masada, whose walls are, which is incredible because it's on the top of a plateau. So you've got to climb up to it, but then there's walls on top of it. Jericho had walls. That's, of course, the story of Joshua.
Sure.
Which, if you really read it carefully, you find out that what's happening is that while Joshua's going around and circling and blowing the shofarot, that people are climbing into the city through the house with the red scarf so that they can get over the wall and in. And obviously the blowing of the horns is not at that location, so that everybody's looking at Joshua circling the city, and then it falls from inside. It's really guerrilla warfare.
Oh, my.
But you've got to read the book carefully enough to... And they talk about it. It's not hidden.
Okay.
It's just it sounds much better to have the Cecil B. DeMille kind of story of, but that's not quite really what happened. Somebody came in from the inside and opened the door. And then it's often when that would happen in ancient days is they would burn the cities. And what they're really burning is the wheat stores, the wheat and grain stores, so that the city can't sustain itself. And then people aren't going to flock to it because there's not food.
Oh, and I thought the Russians were the first to do that.
No, they learned it. We've known it for a long time, ever since humans came across wild growing wheat and grain, which happens up probably on the route that Abraham takes to get into Canaan. When he comes through Ur of the Chaldees are up somewhere in the stands, and he comes on down and through a natural barley grain area.
Wow.
And people start to store it because grain doesn't ripen. Berries and things like that and pomegranates, you can grab stuff when it's not prime season. There's a little bit of fruit hanging on the tree, and you can hunt or gather. But grain, you've got to hunt or gather when it's ripe. It'll last forever if you store it dryly, and critters don't eat it. And that's so here's a sidebar. That's how cats domesticated themselves. Because
Wait a minute, what?
once humans started to store grain, and even more so after they cultivated it and started to grow it, And then when they store it, then of course rats and mice are attracted to the grains because it's fair pickings. It's just sitting there. And the little sand cats, whatever branch of that family descended into house cats,
Go after the mice.
went after the mice and the rats.
Sure.
And because it was easy pickings for them too. So they hung around, and because humans came and went to grab the grain and the barley, the different grains that they needed, the wheat, the barley, the oats, then the cats got used to humans being around and even occasionally got a scrap. But that's why cats are not as interactive with their humans. They tolerate us because we provide food. So it's a different kind of relationship.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love these commercials now that are on. It's a dog food commercial that's refrigerated.
Yeah.
And the people look at this thing, what is this doing in a refrigerator? You
Yeah.
know? Yeah.
It's fresh, yeah.
I love it. I love it. Yeah.
And then the animals do love it too.
Sure they
And
do.
so dogs came to be domesticated because they worked with the shepherds
Okay, that makes sense.
and
Yeah.
did things like that. They guarded sheep, they guarded chickens, they guarded from other predators. And so they learned to work with humans to get their reward for having helped the human. And so there's a more cooperative relationship between humans and dogs. But dogs also self-domesticated. They started realizing that, hey, there's food to be had by guarding and herding instead of hunting. So they shifted their behavior to protection. And that's how they became guard animals and herding animals. And they started taking on those duties. And it paid. It worked out. Plus, they like humans.
Mm-hmm.
Cats tolerate humans. Dogs like them. And yeah, I like to think that my cats like me, but I'm pretty sure it's because I pet and scratch and give food. They like my husband better because he gives more food. He's also home more than I am because I'm doing crazy things like radio shows. So yeah, so Jerusalem still is a relatively, again, it's kind of a, groups tend to stick in their quarters, but there's not usually active animosity.
Well, like Jerry mentioned, they're in a very small area, but they all seem to get along.
And they have for many, many years. There was a period after the 48 war until 67 where the Jewish quarter actually had been leveled and the Jews were not there. That they came back after 67 and rebuilt it. And it's beautifully rebuilt. It's spectacular now. But part of that's because it was rebuilt in recent years instead of just being very old. But Jerusalem is like most really old cities. You're not going to drive a car through most of it. The biggest area where you're going to drive a car in the old city will be the gate where the guy wouldn't get off his horse to come in, so they had to rebuild the gates. It's fascinating to do some of the different tours. There's a great set of tours at the Citadel of David. They do a light show that goes through the history of Jerusalem. It's an interesting place. It's been around since dirt. It's one of the older cities, right? When David conquers Jerusalem and makes it his city, it's already there. And in fact, he sneaks inside the walls because it's really hard to attack a walled city from outside. The Romans do it, but it takes them a while.
Mm-hmm. Those big cannonballs.
Yeah. Well, usually what they focus on is trying to ram through the gate because the gate's usually a metal closing door of some sort. And so that's an important piece. If you're going to the Armenian quarter, for example, at sunset, they really do close the gates to that section. So you're not going to get in if you try to go out for a late night, whatever. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So there really are areas where the gates are still closed at night.
Oh, wow.
Now, it might not be sundown. It might be later in the night now that people have different lives. But that was, yeah, it was a way of making it safe inside a walled city. You are safer inside walls. You're safer in your home than if you're sleeping on the patio.
I remember this goes back years where 60 Minutes did a feature on Jerusalem and the various churches. And you know, you look and how ornate some of this was inside. Oh,
Well, they weren't busy on Facebook
yeah.
or TikTok or Instagram.
You
Yeah.
think? Yeah.
So people would sit and embellish things and make them more beautiful. And that was just part of what you did. You just, you spent your time doing some of those things. So we see a lot more handiwork in older times than we see today. Today people are involved in their screens and what have you. Or painting.
Oh, I meant to. Okay. So you had your students
I
at
did.
Kaiser
Yeah,
paint.
right.
Some of that stuff looks beautiful.
Yeah, I was blown away by how gorgeous the students did, and it speaks to me. I'm better at giving the instruction and showing them techniques to get them started, and they're doing amazing things. There are so few rules that you need to make a really gorgeous painting, and I have figured out how to communicate those basic things. The other thing that people were doing is that I showed a video. There's a couple of compilations on YouTube of different styles of painting, just to show the students how many different ways you can do these kinds of paintings. And students were just latching on to, I'd brought in tools, I'd brought in cookie cutters to be open cup. There's a kind of pour called open cup pour. I had a hair dryer there, I had straws, I had all kinds of tools for them to use. And the rule that I said was you get to pick 3 to 4 colors. And when you do that, they pick beautiful palettes that work together.
Wow.
And I actually had fewer paint colors for them to pick from, but they did a much better job. I'm
Nice.
gonna add a different green to the combination. Some yellow and some green. Those were the 2 colors that were missing. But you can make just about anything if you've got the basic colors.
That is so cool. I mean, it's so colorful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so many different styles. If anybody wants to see that, it's public, it's open, it's on my Facebook wall. I went and snapped a picture of every painting that was there, and yeah, you see as many different styles as there are personalities and interests. Somebody did a planet. Somebody did. A lot of them look like, well, not unlike what's behind me, different seascapes and lagoon kind of pictures. One of them, somebody said, looked like an aerial map of Hawaii.
So how do they tell you they felt when they
Well, we have a discussion afterward
Okay.
about the difference that they notice in their own physiology before and after the event. And then we also talk about what were the subjects that we discussed while you were doing it, because it's a tension intervention. It's a cathartic thing. It releases a lot of tension and is very useful for that function, but it also serves a therapeutic benefit. And we had both upper level psych students in there who were doing their projects of talking to people to see what subjects they'd come up with, and then the students themselves working through it. So it was analyzed at about 3 different levels by the students, and it's one of their assignments. They have to do this piece, and then they debrief on it afterward. And of course, they have the extreme benefit of being able to take a beautiful painting home.
Yeah.
And in this case, it really was. There was not one dud in the batch. There was not one that I think didn't turn out absolutely spectacular. So, yeah.
Wow.
And
It's amazing.
yeah. So it is part of the Intro to Psychology and the Human Development curriculum to have a hands-on project, and this is their hands-on project. So it's a great one. And the other thing that I'm finding is that other groups are wanting to incorporate it in interesting ways because it is a stress reliever. And so for any curriculum that deals with self-care, it is great for teaching self-care modalities.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah, there's a value in it. So, yeah, so again, let's stop real quickly and just wish everybody who celebrates it a happy Easter. And if you're wondering why it's called Easter, now there's a piece. It comes from Ostara, which is the Wiccan celebration of spring, rebirth, fertility, and that's why bunnies and eggs.
There you go.
And that's why there's an egg in the Seder, because we looked at Nowruz, which is the Zoroastrian festival of spring, which is also coming. And it's a celebration of the spring vegetables. Looks an awful lot like a Seder plate. But that has to do with the destruction. We'll talk more about that in the coming weeks. But that has to do with the destruction of Jerusalem, because after the temple's destroyed, Jews can no longer celebrate Passover the way that it was before the temple's destroyed. So here's the piece. Jesus did not have a Seder the way that the Seder is now done as the Last Supper, because they still did the traditional Passover meal, which was different. It's not until the temple's destroyed, about 30 to 40 years after Jesus' death. It changes. It changes with the destruction of the temple. And that's the Seder that we do now. So 1900 and maybe 50 years or 50-some years. Not that long.
All right. So when's that going to be?
The Seder is the 22nd of April, a Monday night at 6 p.m. And that's when we're going to start. Probably eat 7:15.
Awesome. All right.
Okay.
Have a good week.
You too. Have a great one.
You've been listening to Ask a Rabbi right here on WPSL, Port St. Lucie, Talk of the Treasure Coast, webcaster to the world.